So we're back here with section 3 today. All right. Let's then move just up to chapter 18. Chapter 18 and 19 really talk about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember earlier on when Abraham and Lot came to a certain point, they didn't want to be in each other's hair. So Abraham said to Lot, you take that side and I'll go this way. So ultimately, Lot then settled down in Sodom and Gomorrah. However, Sodom and Gomorrah became a very notorious town. Let me see here. Let's look at chapter 18. About verse 22. So, these men that are visiting Abraham come and tell him that God is planning to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And in the rest of chapter 18 is where then Abraham says, he kind of bargains with him. What if you find 50 people? You still going to destroy it? Oh, no, if we find 50, we won't. Then Abraham thinks, well, how about 45? So they whittle it down to about 10. They find 10 people. What is that there? Verse 32. For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. Because, Abraham was concerned about his nephew. Now, verse 19. So, two of the angels came to, this is really,
Chapter 19.
Chapter 19, I'm sorry. This is really quite the story. So I'm going to hit some of the highlights. Chapter 19. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the ground and said, My lords, turn aside, I pray you, to your servant's house, and spend the night and wash your feet, then you may rise up early and go your way. They said, No, we will spend the night in the street. But he urged them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house, and he made a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But, here's where it gets kind of dicey. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people of the last man, surrounded the house, surrounded Lot's house, and they called to Lot, Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them. Now, that we may know them is the biblical way, that we may have sexual relations with them.
The NIV says, so that we can have sex.
Yes. So Lot went out the door to the men, shut the door. I beg you, do not act so wickedly. But now look what Lot does. He throws his two daughters under the bus. Behold, I have two daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out, and you can do with them as you please. Only do not have anything to do with the men. And it goes on. Just the second half of verse 9. Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break the door. But the men put forth their hands and brought Lot into the house to them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the door of the house, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves groping for the door. See, God intervened. And the men that broke in then to do harm to these visitors, they were struck with blindness, so now they're groping around trying to find, how do I get out of here? Verse 14. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, Up, get out of this place, the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. When morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, Arise, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, lest they be consumed in the punishment of the city. But they lingered. Verse 17. Flee for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Flee to the hills, lest you be consumed. Verse 24. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down on Sodom and Gomorrah and toward the land of the valley, and behold, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of the furnace. Verse 30. Now Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar, so he dwelt in a cave with his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come in to us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and did not know when she lay, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. And the next day, more or less, the younger said, Hey, wait, you had your fun last night. What about me? So the younger then went in. They made the father drink wine, lay down. Thus, verse 36, thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Amorites to this day. So, there we have it. So, the daughters are quite wicked themselves. Here we have the men of the town, and you can't probably, you live in an environment like that, something's going to rub off on you. So here the men of the town saw these 2 strangers come in and stay with Lot, and they were in their mind were saying, if I can be just coarse with you for a moment, they were probably saying, we've probably slept around with all the people here in Sodom and Gomorrah, but now here are some people that we've not entertained ourselves with. So let's try to do what we can with them. And of course, we know how that happened. That just made God say, well, this is why I'm destroying the city, because the city is very evil. However, once they flee, the 2 daughters say, hey, wait a minute. Our husbands-to-be, they were back there. They got all burned up. Now there's no man around that's going to make us their wives. They concocted this idea. Let's make our father drunk. Let's lay with him, and maybe we'll become pregnant, and maybe somehow then we'll preserve our offspring that way. And that's exactly what happened. Any questions? You don't need to read some kind of like Barbara Cartwright novel. Some of the stuff is right here in the Bible. It's just, it's incredible. And you wonder, when you read some of these things, you have to walk away saying, well, God is a merciful God, that He gave certain people so much latitude to kind of get their lives straightened out. Nothing has changed. And why has nothing changed? Because sin is still sin. Sin is still a disobedience of God's commands, of God's law. Not yet, no. No, not yet. Not yet. Well, no, I'm going to say, how did they... Well, Well, let me just let me try to answer that question in a very general way. You talked about the story. I think God, no, but I think God is giving us a story here, our story. And I think through the reading of the story, of the historical record, we have to walk away saying, boy, these people, they're worse than we are. You know, we would never do that. I mean, and you come to your own conclusions. Now, the one thing that binds Abram's time and our time together is sin. So we're getting a picture that these people were gross sinners. But when you look at the whole picture, you got to then come, because we're living in the New Testament times, and you have to then remember, but it was for people like them that Christ died. That's no longer the way we operate. That's no longer the way we do business. But even for people like that, for sinners, for cheats, you name it, Christ died for them. So, other than, I'm just going to answer it this way, other than you seeing the picture of the degradation, the wickedness of mankind, it was to that group of people that God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were born under the law. And in the end, if I'm going to clean up my act, I'm not going to do it. I can't, I'm not capable to do it. Christ does it for me. His life is that robe of righteousness that covers my wickedness. You know, and yeah, when you read some of these things in the Old Testament, it's pretty tough. You know, there are a couple of stories in the New Testament as well, but by the time we get to the New Testament, things are beginning to kind of like shake down, and because of the commandments and because of this and whatnot. And you asked a question earlier about how did they know that this was wrong? Well, even though they didn't have the Ten Commandments, there still was that, what should I say, that innate moral law somehow within you that, you know, you knew right from wrong. You knew it was wrong to kill somebody because you didn't see eye to eye. So I think while there may not have been a command to say this is forbidden, there was that innate feeling that, well, this isn't right. You know,
Natural law.
natural law. And because even natural law got so muddied, that's why God then ultimately had to give us a commandment or commandments to speak directly, because if you didn't get it the first time, here it is in stone. You know? All right. Let's then go to chapter 21, 22. Verse 2 of 21. And Sarah conceived and bore Abram a son in his old age. At the time of which God had spoken to Abram, called him his son. She bore him Isaac. Verse 4. Abram circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded. Verse 13. I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. So therefore, there you see the two promises. God will make a great nation of Isaac, who is the son of the promise, but of the slave woman Hagar, I will also make him also a nation. All right, let's just then go to 22. So Isaac was just born. We're going to fast forward it to about when he was about 13 years old. And this is where God tests Abraham. Let me just summarize very quickly. You know the story. Now, mind you, to this point in time, for Isaac to be born, came through a lot of angst. Abraham thought, well, it's going to be by a servant in my house. They'll become my heir. Then it's going to be by a surrogate. But then ultimately God said 13 years later, no, Sarah will have your own flesh and blood. And then Isaac was born. So now we're going to move from that point, 13 years forward. So Isaac is 13 years old, and God says to Abram, now I want you to take your son Isaac, and I want you to eat meat for sacrifice, because I want you to go and I want you to sacrifice him back to me. I gave him to you. I want him sacrificed back to me. So this is what we meet here in 22. Verse 2 of 22. God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering upon one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. And then they go ahead and they got the wood, they got the fire, they got all that stuff. Verse 7. So they're traveling towards. Verse 7. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. He said, behold, the fire and the wood. Where is the lamb? Where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they both went. So they went both of them together. And now let's just go down to about verse 11. So anyway, look at 9, verse 9. When they came to the place of which God had told them, Abram built an altar there and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. Then Abraham put forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. He said, do not lay your hand on the lad, or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. Verse 17. Because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will indeed bless you, and will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies, and by your descendants shall all the nations of the earth bless themselves, because you have obeyed my voice. Think about what God asked of him. Think about what God asks of us sometimes. Now, I have 4 children. God has never asked me to sacrifice any of them like this. But can you imagine for a moment, if you can, what must have been going through Abraham's mind as he made that 2.5-day journey to the land of Moriah? He knew what he had to do. He knew that he loved God. God blessed him. He waited so long for this boy. And now God had that right as the creator and giver of all. He wanted him back as an offering. Can you only imagine what was going on in his mind? And yet, from the biblical record, Abraham was a man of faith. He got to the point where he was going to slit his throat. And the angel said, stop. Now I know. You know, there's an awful lot.
I still remember as a child thinking, I hope that God didn't ask that of my parents.
Yeah, no, that's so very true. And it's like, when you read some of these stories in the Bible, you walk away with that God really asked a lot of these people. But I guess we have to transpose it into our time. What is God asking of me? And if God were to ask me, I don't know if I could do it. Of course, now there's all other problems, but
Yeah, like legal.
Yeah, but
Go to jail.
But the point is, I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if any parent could do it. And yet sometimes when God asks us of something, I think God wants a total commitment.
I don't know much the total commitment. I just remember reading the story at another time, and it was that the child sacrifice was not unusual. That was done.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was really, this statement is a statement against that practice, that God
Okay.
That was wrong, I mean, that's
Yeah.
my interpretation.
No, that's very good. Yes, because ultimately during these
You don't do that.
no during these particular cultures, that all was a part of the sacrificial system to the pagan gods. To keep the gods happy.
Send rain or whatever.
Yeah.
I remember there was a family that lived on my block, and the one daughter went into to be a nun. But whatever order she went into, she could never come back to her family's home.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah. Yeah, and then I wanted to end by saying just that. It's not so much that God is going to ask of us as Christians that we sacrifice in the way that Abraham was asked to, but there are other ways. There are other ways, and that is it. That very good example. People that decide to dedicate their lives, answer the calling of God in the church as a missionary, as a pastor, whatever it might be, or in other some kinds of work that is done, that you're out there in the wherever it might be, representing the good of humanity. Or how many times have we heard of parents that they wanted to do X, Y, and Z, but for the sake of money or whatever, they wanted their kids to have a better life than them. They sacrificed so their kid could go to college or whatever it might be. Any final thoughts or questions?